Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of All Aces on Air. I am joined today by my wonderful colleague and friend, Janifa Fortune, MPH. Janifa serves as our Chief of Strategy and Director of Project Management, as well as our lead facilitator in our client-facing work. In addition to her official titles, Janifa also leads our team in advocating for personal wellness, which she sees as being closely tied to both racial justice and spirituality. Before we jump into our questions, how are you, Janifa? And what exactly does the title of this episode, Am I Clear on My Why, mean?
Hi, Rico. So first, I'm so happy to be here with you. I feel like this is just a sneak peek into the conversations that we often have behind the scenes as colleagues and friends. So I'm excited to be able to explore with everyone on the public facing side of All Aces. So, how am I doing? I am well. I am feeling really good today. Feeling good in my body. I had some lunch before coming here, joining you today. So I'm feeling nourished physically as well. In terms of our topic of discussion today, am I clear on my why? So for me, my this idea of one's why or their purpose really comes down to one's foundation, right? It's for me the ground from which everything flourishes. I think that your gifts and your talents flourish from your why. I think that your career and the pivots and opportunities that you decide to take up flourish from your why. I think that the uh, the decisions that we make on a daily basis, from those small decisions on where am I going today and how am I spending my time today? What's on my to-do list to those major decisions like what am I, what am I going to pour myself into in terms of this job that has presented itself in front of me, or what am I going to pour myself into in terms of this cool opportunity that someone has brought into my world for partnership, right? So I think your why, your purpose is just the ground that everything flourishes from. And for me, I my why or my purpose really is anchored in remembrance.
Hmm.
um, I think so. 5 years ago, if you asked me this question, what I would have shared then, and what I'll share today, may have, you know, so I don't think I would use the same language for sure,
Five
right?
years ago, you would not have posed the same question. That's what you're saying?
No, I would have posed the same question. How I answered the question would have sounded differently, and not in a sense that I think my purpose or my why 5 years ago was different, but
Mhm.
I do think our understanding of our purpose and why expands and grows with us, right? So I
Hmm.
think um, my understanding of the ground that I'm walking on today is a little bit more refined, or not refined, that's not a good word, but my depth and understanding of the
Hmm.
ground I'm today is a little bit different from 5 years ago. So today, I believe my purpose is anchored in this idea of remembrance. I think all the things that I pour myself into and how I even engage in my relationships, personal and professional, they all boil down to this idea of really supporting people in remembering who they are,
Hmm.
and that they stand for, right? and a piece of that, it also boils down to asking myself the same questions, right? Asking myself, what is it that I stand for, and who am I, you know?
That's so interesting that you frame it that way. Remembering yourself. I mean, I've talked to a lot of different people, and there's sometimes when people talk about their inner child, right? And going back to that, in some sense, original self. And there's a lot of discussion in our culture about authenticity and what does it mean to be yourself. We're told from the time we're kids, our generation anyway, like, just be yourself. But there's a lot of adults who are like, I have no idea who I am. Kind of an existential crisis for some even. So that's really fascinating that you ground it in remembrance. I wonder if you'd say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this idea that some adults may encounter this question and be like, what? I don't have the answer to this, is a real thing. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, right? Because it is a question that it's helpful to constantly come back to, right? And so the moment that you are aware that, oh, I do have a self that I should be aware of, and I do have a larger purpose and a why that I should begin to excavate through and figure out what it means for me, that is good, right? Like that moment of awareness is great, right? Because then from there, it's just a matter of digging in deeper, right? So
Mm,
to the earlier about 5 years ago, the language I would have used would have been different, but at the root of it all, I would have something to say about who am I and what is it that I stand for, right? It's just the breath, like the breath and the depth that just grows and expands. I mean,
yeah.
isn't that what it's about?
So this is a lot more than just to really simplify this or make it really clear for people. We're talking beyond self-awareness, right? Like self-awareness, whoa, here I am. That doesn't really get at what we're talking about today, which is not an awareness of our being, but an awareness of our reason for being, or what it is that motivates us, that compels us into our different spaces. Is that right?
Right, right, yeah. And I think the it's okay that our motivation for being or the reason for being molds and develops with us, right?
Hmm.
Because we mold and develop as individuals. So that's okay. And that's, if anything, a good thing.
I mean, I've got to say that when well, to be clear for our audience, Janifa onboarded me onto the team, and as part of that process, there were a lot of questions about who I was as a person, like at a fundamental level, and it's become clear in my involvement with All Aces and in my involvement with the client side of things that we're really positioning the individual, the self, and the development of the self at the center of our models, our frameworks, our values. And so I kind of wonder if you can ground for our audience, what does it mean to get clear on our why in the context of the work that we do as a team on All Aces?
Yeah. So we, always market ourselves as non-traditional consultants, right? And what that boils down to is being a organization's applied learning partner. And part of being one's applied learning partner really requires us as individuals and as a team to be engaged in learning, right? Uh, we Although we are often looked to as the content experts around racial equity and racism, we very much come to this work with humility and understanding that our learning is working in tandem with the expertise that we're providing to our clients. And so I do think that within the greater scheme of things, it it is important for us to always come back to this idea of where am I on my racial equity journey in this work, and how is my where I am, how is that impacting how I'm engaging with a client right now? How is this
Yeah.
impacting how I'm taking in this experience with a client? How is this impacting the extent of um, expertise or curricula that I'm delivering? Um, so yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but the learning is very much on the forefront of our minds as it is the learners who engage with us.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, we're doing this as part of our work. This is not exactly client-facing work, but maybe we could talk a little bit about why it's important for us to be transparent with our audience, with our clients, that we are also very much on our own racial equity journeys.
Yeah. So I think talking a little bit about our values is a good example for our audience. So we function around four core values: collective care, client care, playmakers, and practice what we preach. And for us as a team, and for me as an individual, I know we all, well, let me speak for myself. I know I am constantly thinking about what it means to reinforce these values internally and externally, what it means to show up in these values as we engage with our clients, um, and what it means to, again, grow and develop in these values, right? Because
Yeah.
even that, I think, is something that's ongoing, and is very much part of the racial equity journey, right? Like the the application of collective care, my depth of that has grown. The application
Mm.
of practicing what I preach, the depth of that for me has grown. Um, yeah, so thinking business has definitely grown for us, right, these past
Yeah.
6 months.
Oh, yeah,
And
so much.
done a lot of internal pivoting as a
Yes.
team. And what I've been thinking about lately is how I have personally grown in a couple of these values given the
Yeah.
times that we've had in the past 6 months, right? So, uh,
So if I could just jump
I'll,
in here real quickly, I think it's really important for our audience to know that among Jennifer's many accomplishments, just by circumstance, I guess, she's also been the longest serving member of our team, right? So you were with Atia at the beginning, and so all that is to add context around what she has learned, because it's quite clear to the rest of us that she's probably grown the most out of all of us. Of course, having more recently joined the team.
thank you for that, Rico. Yeah, so um, thinking of practice what we preach specifically, right? This is
Hmm.
a that um, really is contingent on this idea of being responsible over your own learning. And for me, having been the first person that Dr. Martin brought on to the team, I had the pleasure of taking advantage of so many opportunities where I could just observe and soak up and in as much as I can from Dr. Martin herself, right? And I mean, folks who've listened to this know how brilliant Dr. Martin is. Folks who know
Hopefully.
about all they know how brilliant she is, right? But what I love so much about her teaching and those opportunities that I've had to just be in her presence and observe is that she does such a good job of taking all of this research, all of these things that are just way beyond my area of expertise and understanding, and breaking it down to that digestible stuff that I can eat and mull over, right, and reflect on. And so what I what I've really, honed in on is prior to joining All Aces as a Black woman who often navigated predominantly white spaces, um, in addition to regular experiences as a Black woman in Boston, right?
Mm,
Add this layer of being the only or one of the onlys in spaces. And what I caught myself doing a lot was silencing myself out of fear that I did not have the language to confront racism when I was on the receiving end of it, or I didn't have the skills to help support myself and maybe one other person who looked like me in the space, right?
mm,
And then coming full circle now after being on the team and soaking in so much, I am in the space where I feel confident enough to speak up, right? I feel confident enough to take up space. And that is because I not only have the language, but I have the knowledge and the wisdom to apply with discernment and
mm,
able to um, be able to like reframe experiences with folks so that they understand what you just did actually reinforced racism. And let me explain to you why it was harmful to me and why it may be harmful to other people who look like me, right? And that is something that has been so critical for me, right? Particularly as a Black woman and coming full circle and being able to do that, that has been so helpful to me. Because like, what do you do, Rico, when your, leadership and years of experience in your own body is invalidated? Like, what do you do when you feel as though your dignity as a person of color has been violated? What do you do when you feel like um, your knowledge is underestimated, right? And that as a Black woman was a regular experience for me and continues to be a regular experience for me. And so it's been absolutely key for me to come to the space, to arrive to the space where I'm just like, okay, I know what this is. I know like what's at work right now, and I have the skills I need. I have the framing I need to take up space, to
yeah.
speak up for myself, and really reinforce practicing what I preach, right? Because part of practicing what we preach, particularly for people of color who are confronted with racism, is being able to leverage those skills and those tools in a way that reinforces their agency as opposed to their powerlessness. You know,
Yes.
that was a long winded answer.
But I think it was a good answer. And there's a couple of things that I'd like to dig in there. Um, in terms of taking up space, I'm a man. Obviously, I'm not a white man. Nonetheless, being a man does afford me certain privileges when it comes to taking up space, be that physical space. Well, Jennifer knows from many meetings, sometimes I don't really shut up, and so I can take up space that way. There's a lot of ways that people might be used to taking up space, such that they are not really aware that. their presence can be removing the opportunity for others to take up space as well. And one thing I'm really thinking about is well, yesterday during our team meeting, I found myself taking up space in a way that was not so developmental. Actually, part of it was because I was surprised, but I had a little bit of a flare with a team member, and that was Steven, and I apologized for it because. I really had to center our values again and practice what we preach and go back to that, and that took a lot of work, and you and I have been working together, and you know very much that I'm working on getting better at embodying these values, but it is a lot of work, right?
Mm.
And so when I see you taking up space after being, a bit further along in your development, not only with Dr. Martin, but with our values and in the work, all caps, right? Not all caps, capitalized. um, it's very different than how I would take up space, even when I'm being at my most developmental. So I wonder if you can, just talk about maybe your road to getting comfortable in taking up space, or maybe how taking up space as a Black woman might have its own unique challenges that, like, someone like me might not be aware of.
Mm.
Is that even a good
Yeah.
question? I have no idea.
No, it is. So so one, I think taking up space requires um standing on humility, right? And exercising that humility. And two, I think taking up space boils down to practice, right? So we get better at it the more we do it. Likewise, we get more confident in it the more we do it. But for me, as a particular, I want to touch on the second part of your question. For me, as a Black woman, um, when I think of taking up space, I actually think of our definition of racial equity,
Okay.
right? So if you are thinking about our definition of racial equity, that starts off with it's an intentional practice. Um, and it's an intentional practice that really requires you to center the shared humility that exists between individuals. And for me, um, that shared humanity is the piece that I really hone in on, right? Because if I am if I am in a space where, so going back to being a Black woman navigating predominantly white spaces, right?
Yeah.
Actually, no, I need to go there. Like, I'm taking up space whether I'm in the presence of individuals who identify as white or I'm in the presence of individuals who identify people of color, right? Um, in the moment, I literally have to ground myself in this being in front of me has a whole slew of experiences. They have a
Mhm.
whole slew of realities that I do not have. And likewise, I have my own experiences and my own realities that I'm bringing into this space, right? In addition to that, we both have our conditioning, right? And so if we're thinking about the system of oppression, we all have this conditioning rooted in racism, that whether you are a person of color or a white person, you have to navigate through, right? And manage. And so for me, taking up space requires me to literally ground in the reality that, okay, I actually am being hit by elements of your internalized whiteness, or I'm being hit by elements of your anti Blackness, but I actually have to recognize that and move through it, right? In order to
Mhm.
get space, just like I have to recognize your experiences and recognize your realities and move through that in order to get to the space where I'm actually touching that shared humanity that we both have. Because without that, right, that's when um, the the result is a fiery experience, right? Where I've been harmed, I'm angry, and so I'm not being developmental, to your point earlier, right? I'm not sharing whatever it is that's on my mind and heart um, with intention or grace, right? I'm hot and I'm spitting out whatever is, rising up my body in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's not a real experience. Like, that's a real experience and it has to be acknowledged, right? And with practice we learn how to manage and take care of ourselves in the moment through those type of emotions. But again, like, to going back to, this idea of taking up space as a Black woman, like, it requires me to think of what what is the shared humanity that exists right now, and how can I tap into it. And again, like, I literally have to dissect and move through everything that is being presented to me, right? Everything, all the stuff.
All the stuff. Oh, that's a lot of stuff. So let's try to tie this back to getting clear on our why. So how do we center that shared humanity? And how do we take that thread of our reason for existing, our purpose? How do we connect those two things?
Mhm. Reflection. So I think reflection is so key. So going back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of our why being that ground from which everything flourishes, right? For me, health and wellness, although my career has taken on many shapes and forms within the health and wellness space, um, for me, none of it has deterred me from my why, right? Because again, if my why all boils down to this idea of remembrance and supporting folks in remembering who they are and what they stand for and doing the same thing for myself. Health and wellness for me is a lens that helps me to do that, or wrap my head around how to do that, right? Because health and wellness, or wellness in general, it forces you to think about um, the full humanity of individuals, right? So the I, when thinking about who's the I, you're forced to think about the all the dimensions and elements that make up an individual, right? Like, you're forced to think about the physical, you're forced to think about the emotional well-being, you're forced to think about the spiritual well-being, you're forced to think about all these dimensions that make up the individual, and thus prioritize and take care of all of those elements, right? So I say all of that to say, um, I think part of the reason why self-reflection is so critical is because it allows us to really get into the space of connecting dots for ourselves and making meaning out of um, the lens that we, enjoy or take up for ourselves, right? So not every health and wellness is my lens, but what is your lens? Because that lens is one way of getting clear on making sense of your why, and also constantly bringing yourself back to your why, particularly as you move into new spaces and take on opportunities, right? Many opportunities come our way, but they're not all meant for us. And I think
Hmm.
why is that anchoring that helps you make those type of decisions. Um, and that self-reflection piece is like the bridge that helps you to do that.
So I think one thing we have to explain to clients a lot is why centering humanity is so essential to our model of organizational change, right? Which is an equity-based model. But you know, you're the content expert here. Like in your experience working with our clients, why has it been so important to do that?
Well, um, I think we talk about this a lot internally as an organization. We Our work is so critical right now because we're coming we're coming out of a long history where humanity hasn't been prioritized and humanity hasn't been centered. And so for us as a organization that centers this idea of humanity being pivotal to confronting racism and humanity being critical to pursuing racial equity, it's nothing new, but it's we're actually doing our due diligence in helping folks see that it is possible, right? Because I think that's a piece that has been lost. That folks are in the space of, well, given the long-standing history of systems of oppression like racism, what does it even look like to pursue racial equity? Like, what does that even mean? You're saying to that we should be thinking about centering humanity. Well, what does that look like? Because in my organization, we've been doing this way for X amount of years. In my industry or in my field, we've been doing things this type of way for X amount of years. So what does this even look like? And I think for us, we're like opening the box of possibilities that have always existed, but just haven't been recognized, because there's been folks out there who have been saying this for years, right? But just haven't it hasn't been recognized.
I mean, something that we've talked about um, in our team meetings that's really stuck with me is the idea that when someone dehumanizes others, they're also dehumanizing themselves.
Hmm.
So if we think about that, right, uh, if we're doing kind of status quo, business as usual, bottom line kind of thinking that a lot of organizations, if we're being really honest, still very much operate under, well, we get weird things like in our culture, we've got the real me and the work me. I don't have another body that I slip my brain into when I sit in this exact spot every day and do my work, right? It's this kind of weird thing that happens. And a lot of analogies that we have, like sometimes referring to systems as machines or the government as the machine, like very purposefully not human. Uh, so I think you're right. Showing people that it's possible, that's actually a lot more work than we might assume at first glance. And I wonder if in your time with All Aces, you might dig into what some of those obstacles might be.
Hmm. So one that's coming to mind right now is the concept of time.
Okay.
Uh, so I often hear clients share this challenge with having time. right? Having time to um, be more equitable in the the efforts that they take on internally, or just having time to be more intentional in how they're pursuing their work. Um, and that for me, the framing of that in of itself is challenging, right? Because if we think of time as a resource, then when we're thinking about the possibilities that exist around like how we can do this work, how we can center humanity, how we can ensure that we're not hurting others and I'm not hurting myself, right? If we think of time as a resource and we really just focus on this idea of abundance, right? Like we think of we really just hone in on creating possibilities without limits, creating possibilities without obstacles, creating possibilities with literally the only objective being to center people and recognize people for all that they are. I think we would be in a better place. And I think organizations would be able to wrap their heads around what it means to do this work, and time would just be essentially the resource that we utilize to make our possibilities come to fruition, as opposed
Hmm.
to the obstacle, um, as opposed to the hole that we're trying to fit ourselves into, right? Because if time is not your resource, but rather the parameters that you're working within, the possibilities that you're coming up with will probably reinforce this idea of like dehumanization, right? Because we're going back to machines and
Yeah.
systems, people. To your point earlier.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I'm having a couple of thoughts here. Like one is when we treat things as finite resources, if we're looking at things from a conflict perspective, then this is enough to motivate competition, which of course easily leads into conflict. So if time is a scarce resource and somebody is always late, well, that person is competing for time. Already there's conflict, right?
Mm.
But then also, I love that image of fruition because we know that as much as we would love to stick to deadlines, or maybe not, but often we would like things to happen on our timeline as if it belongs to us, right? Rather than it being a feature of the universe, which is what it is. So sometimes your apples aren't ready, your crops are not ready. You gotta let them do their thing for one more week, a week more. Uh, I'm not a farmer, so I'm running out of steam on this analogy, but I think my point is made. um, and yeah, like it is such a strange thing that we're born into this world, we try to learn as much about it, and then all of a sudden we have all these pressures telling us what's possible, what's not possible. You get people saying like, oh, it's too late for me to have children, it's too late for me to have a career, it's too late, it's too late, it's too late. But what a strange way to think about things when none of us really know how much time each of us have, no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For you, what type of possibilities have you been imagining that you just wish, you know, folks like our clients would actually tap into?
One more time.
So thinking about possibilities and rehumanizing the work, right, and centering people. Um, Essentially, for you, like, what can racial equity, what can this work look like,
Mm.
that folks just aren't yet getting at, or maybe some folks are, and it's just a matter of getting more people in the same space, right? But yeah, what does this work look like for you?
I mean, well, as you and I have talked about, for me, internally, this work is often been a great framework for me to deal with a lot of my own internalized stuff. So, be that images and messaging around what a real man is in American society. Um, Sometimes it shows up in how I think about approaching things. Like it can even boil down to as fundamental as what I think of as right and wrong. Sometimes I have to interrogate that a little bit, you know? And so I can imagine for a lot of people, pausing all the action that we do, and this is not to say that action is a negative thing by itself, but often people are not acting so intentionally. And that is when a lot of bad stuff just kind of creeps in, you know? The darkness closes in, kind of like what's happening in the background for you, but not really.
No, just about to say that. Let me like.
My apologies to everyone for the weird transition and bad joke, but we will get back on track right now. Okay, thank you for bearing with us. And thank you, Jennifer. So I think that there's a huge amount of potential, and it actually kind of, I find myself pausing or, trying to take more time to think about that because there are a lot of things that really limit us that maybe don't actually exist, but they exist in our own heads because of our own fears, our own misgivings. And so having some kind of framework to interrogate that, I think, is deeply useful. And I can say to our audience and our clients, whoever is watching, that one of the fantastic things about working on our team is we're not on the outside looking in. We're not out there judging you and telling you what's going to happen. We're saying, hey, we're doing this too, and we'd like you to come along with us, you know? So I think that's actually something very different than anywhere else that I've worked. So I do see that we have a couple questions. So I'd like to address those quickly. We've got a great question from Brooke Moore, and I'm sorry if I didn't say that correct, Brooke. But her question is, how can we decide and understand what our why is? So, like, for
Yeah.
example, what if we have the sense that we've got multiple whys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love that because I've uh entertained that thought as well. Like, what if I have multiple whys? Um, that would be cool. I don't have an answer to that. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But really, for me, what I think is important to hone in on is I don't think we decide our why. I
Hmm.
think we become clear on our understanding of it, but I don't think we decide it. I think it comes to be out of um, essentially the combination of our experiences, our interests, um, where we end up in this world, the error that we're born in, right? Like, I think all of these things contribute to um, that that ground that we end up calling our why or our purpose, right? So yeah, I don't think we decide. I think it's more so, how do I gain clarity on it? And again, for me, it's been that self-reflective journey, right? And constantly coming back to this question of, okay, who am I today? All dimensions of myself, and what is it that I stand for? Um,
So
yeah.
this is something that's, just to try to clarify again, this is something that gets it sounds like what you're saying is like our fundamental natures in some way. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a piece of it. Yeah. Um, so I think what happens a lot is that folks think of the things that they do, and you alluded to this earlier, right? Like earlier, folks think about the things that they do and try to wrap their why around that. And I think that actually limits us, similar to the timepiece that we were just talking about, right? Like if you take what you do and try to wrap your why around that, you're actually limiting yourself of what that
Mm.
why actually is, or could be for you. And so it should be the inverse. Yeah, I think we should be thinking about, um, how does everything I do contribute to this why, or what types of things can I be pulling from the types of things that I do, the types of careers that I've had, the types of jobs that I've taken up, how I end up showing up in my relationships, and what do people, constantly tap me for, or, what is it that folks love about me, right? Like all of these things, I think we can like excavate and go through and really connect the dots for ourselves, to help frame our understanding of the why. But it shouldn't be, let me try to wrap my why around this piece of my life, or this
So the
element of my
mental
life.
image that's been developing in my mind as we've been chatting is like the why. Well, let me contextualize quickly. Um, I remember when I was a kid, I learned that rivers come from somewhere, which, on the surface is not a controversial idea, but yeah, some rivers literally bubble up out of the ground and then they kind of wend their way across the landscape. And so we've got this wellspring of our why that's kind of at the center of our being, and then it's our contexts, like our life experiences and whatnot, that kind of shapes the course of that why. Is that
That's
right? That's right. Okay. So
just
then it becomes,
take my stuff and reshape it and put it
yeah.
into a.
So like you are not your job. So it would not make sense to shape yourself so that you fit into your job role, right? Your job role should fit into who you are.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe that's not an easy thing, but I think we've probably, well, many of us have had jobs where, we got the job, we're getting paid, but it's kind of like, yeah, this is not me. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that can have a huge effect on a person's well-being because, and this is something I find deeply troubling about American culture, is instead of asking about who somebody is, we ask what they do for a living.
Mm.
Big eye roll. Okay.
Rika, and
Unpack.
if there's any question that I cannot stand the most is, so what do you do? It makes, for years, particularly, as I approached the end of my undergrad degree career, and was just stepping into the workforce, and I was, all well, I was figuring it out, right? And that's fine. I still feel like I'm figuring it out.
Same.
So, but hearing that question, the desired response is uh some type of like deliverable, right? Some type of role, a role
Like
within,
a professional consultant, for example.
perhaps, right? So, and like that for me was just like, I could not figure out why it bugged me out so much, because I knew it wasn't just because I didn't have a response, because I actually felt comfortable saying something like, I'm still figuring it out, or I do a lot of things,
Yeah,
right? Like I would give snarky responses like that. And I had no problem doing that. But when I really thought about it, what it came down to why it bugged me out so much was because I was like, oh, like you're the framing of your question is probably coming from a place that we as people are relegated to machines that should be doing and only doing as part of being in this earthly realm. And right now you don't care about my full humanity, you don't care about the full dimensions of myself, you're really just caring about how is it that I probably produce income. That's the
yeah,
only thing that's driving your question, and that for me bugged me out. I mean, of course, right? Because thinking about the things I care about, like, of course it bugged me out, but it took me so long to figure out why that question bugged me out. But yeah, like, it's so limiting, like,
yeah,
what do you, that is so limiting. Why limit? Not only are we limiting the exchange that we could be having with the person in the moment, but we're limiting the like our idea of what this person actually brings to this, or like their purpose in this earthly realm. Like we're limiting that.
yeah,
And the moment you limit that, right, it is the moment that you can also cause harm.
yeah. I mean, to go back to that image of the river that I was talking about, and unfortunately, audience out there, those of you who are watching, you probably know by now that my head's all full of like weird stuff. So here's another little tidbit. But there was a joke in a book that I read a long time ago. There's a river in Florida called the Kissimmee River, and the characters in this book are talking about straightening out the river. And they do this, and the name of the river changes from the Kissimmee River to the Kill Me River, and then it causes all kinds of horrible ecological damage. I looked into this a little bit, I think, and yeah, when you do straighten out rivers, or you try to manage them through man-made stuff, yes, in fact, all kinds of horrible ecological stuff happens. So sometimes we have this idea that we are managing things or we are creating structures that help us out, but we don't always know the impact of that. And so the only thing that we can really kind of interrogate is ourselves, because sometimes the stuff we build has a way of getting away from us. And,
Mm-hmm.
if we become part of that machine, we also get away from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or if we build, this also makes me think of like building ourselves. So you mentioned this earlier, like, who am I professionally and who am I in my personal, right? Like that's that building a particular type of Jennifer to show up in a particular type of space, and building another particular type of Jennifer to, yeah, that is so harmful to our individual well-being, and then of course the collective well-being, for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, we were joking before the show that you said that I'd given you a lot of homework, but just in terms of things to reflect on and think about. But I'm finding that I'm in the same headspace right now, as I often am in the course of this work, which I do absolutely think is a great thing. It is very humbling to recognize more often and more publicly and more to people's faces when you mess up, especially because as humans, we mess up a lot. But what I'm really finding in the course of our work, and what I really value about our team, is that when we do mess up, then we can actually be attentive to that and intentional about it. And I'm certainly a better person for it. So I'm going to move towards the ending here with a standard question, not because you're a standard person. but because I don't know what else to say right now. So in 30 seconds or less, no, that's mean. In general, what would you love to see come out of your work? Oh, wait. My clever brain kicked on. What would you love to see come out of your why?
um, I'm not being timed, am I? Because you
I
said
mean,
30
there is a
seconds.
timer, but we're not beholden to it.
Um, so thinking about my why and generally like how I pour myself into the things I do and the people I care for and love. Being engaged, being engaged in this journey on my for myself really allows me to like remain cognizant and accountable to the idea that everyone should have the space and opportunity to pour themselves into people and opportunities and things with intention and care. Um, and I feel like the more I'm able to show up in my why, the more I'm able to assist people in doing that. Right. And so I
So what
want,
we would call collective care, maybe?
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So I want, I want the experiences that I leave behind and the relationships that I cultivate to really be grounded in this idea or in this truth that, yeah, I can give myself in a way that, or I can give of myself with intention and with care in a way that is truly aligned with myself and not a picture or a conditioned version of myself. Um, so yeah, I I think essentially I hope that people are able to cultivate the joy that I'm able to cultivate and really showing up in my why day
Is that
after day.
fair though? Like you're an exceedingly joyful person.
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to, how you define joy. And for me, joy is just about alignment, right? And so if folks feel like I I am navigating this world out of alignment or in alignment, then yeah, I showed up in my why.
And on that note, thank you very much, Jennifer. This has been really wonderful talking with you and exploring really what's at the center of your work with the team and how, that alignment shapes our work and, has real impact on the lives of not only our team members, but the lives of the people that we come into contact with. So thank you so much. And we will see you all very soon, next week, I believe. Thank you very much and have a great night. This is Enrico E. Manalo with All Aces on Air.
Thank you, Rico.
Thank you.